Einen schönen guten Morgen im Klangraum Krems Minoritenkirche. Willkommen bei den Europäischen Literaturtagen 2021. Über alte Wege und neue Verbindungen. Mit den transnationalen Routen durch Europa sind die Lebenswege von Menschen verknüpft, die auf der Suche nach dem Verbindenden, dem Gemeinsamen und nach dem Besonderen sind. Warum stehen die europäischen Reiserouten nicht derart stark für die Sehnsucht nach Freiheit wie etwa die Route 66 in den USA? Die Gespräche und Lesungen mit Patricia Portela und Mathijs Deen wird Rüdiger Wischenbart moderieren. Er ist Journalist, Buchmarktexperte, war Pressesprecher der Frankfurter Buchmesse und ist heute Berater mit Schwerpunkt Kommunikation und kulturelle Märkte. Zuletzt und brandaktuell von ihm erschienen ist der internationale Digital Consumer Book Barometer für das erste Halbjahr 2021. Bitte, Rüdiger, auf die Bühne.
Vielen Dank für die nette Einführung. Stichwort Reisen muss ich fragen, seid ihr alle da? Das ist ja der normale Startschuss. Seid ihr alle da? Weil so ein Event davon ausgeht, da kommen Leute zusammen, hier in Krems oder auch dann über den Bildschirm, in den Übertragungen. Und das ist schon die erste Etappe der Reise und ich werde jetzt ins Englische überführen, um das Gespräch auch genau mit diesem Thema, mit dieser Frage nach dem Herreisen zu beginnen. Hello, good morning, Patricia, Mathijs. I said to the audience, hello, are you all here? Which is normally in the little children theater, how you welcome the kids, and then they would yell and say, yes, and yes, I'm here. They didn't yell, yes, I know, I mean, that was a mistake. We could try it again. Can you try it? Seid ihr alle da? This is exactly what we need. And I said, that's the start of a travel, or of a travelogue. They came from all various places to gather here to listen to stories. And that's basically what we are supposed to do now. And I connect directly with the last session of last night, where Veronica asked her guests about their travel experience. And I want to do that with you in a very practical way. Why did you come here? And how much did you travel over the past 2 years? Because we are in these strange, different times, Patricia. Why did you come here and how did you manage to get here?
It's a funny question because first of all, I came for the exact same reason I went also to, besides thanking for the invitation and finding it a wonderful idea to be here, of course, sharing different experiences in different literature backgrounds. I came also knowing what's happening and knowing that very soon, like Monday, there will be a confinement, and before we were already talking about partial confinements, but a year ago I went to Copenhagen, and it was the first time I left after the quarantine. I left somewhere because of the urgency to continue to come and meet people in presence. I work in
the urgency.
The urgency. Yeah. But strangely enough, I must say, I started a new job in March 2020, which was to work in a theater, which was not the most, or it was, because I never traveled so much, I never worked so hard. So I remember a lot of people talk about suspension of time and stopping and reading a lot. I've heard it also in these meetings here, and I did not have that experience. I moved to a new city. I moved away from Belgium, from Antwerp, to Viseu, which is a little city in the center of the country. I've realized I had never lived abroad in my own country. I only have lived in Lisbon anywhere else in the world. So it's the most curious and the most interesting question to answer. And I'm here, maybe I'll say I'm here also, understanding the question in another way, because I actually lived in Utrecht 27 years ago, something like that, 25 years ago. And that's where it all started, and that's when I started to write. So traveling made me what I am today.
That's a good sentence to start. Mathijs, what brought you here?
Well, of course, an invitation. Thank you very much. And the invitation was because I've written a book about traveling in Europe, about the long roads of Europe, the network of roads that were designed after the Second World War to unite the old enemies. And I was wondering the same question as Walter Gront just asked, why these long roads over our continent that go all the way to Kazakhstan and to the North Cape and to the Mediterranean and to Ireland, why these enormous distances and roads don't evocate a kind of belonging to our continent. Why don't we travel them like you travel the Route 66? But you know, these roads are called European roads, and like the E4, the E10. But get your kicks on the E4 doesn't work. And why is that?
It doesn't spin your dreams and
No.
Gives you direction for your whole life, right?
No, and my question was, why is this? And is the fact that we don't connect adventure to the roads on our own continent, has it to do with how we connect to our own continent don't we think that we belong to the whole continent?
But I guess since the Roman times, roads were tools or machines to project force, and that means military force.
Yeah, well, this is one of the explanations. But in America, it's the same story, of course. That it's how the West was won, and people were living there, and it might be so that well, there are songs written and books written about the long roads of the American continent, because it was a tool of nation building. It united the people.
Yes, but
in Europe,
at first it was a way to conquer
Yeah.
the continent.
Yeah,
so
and
it was
that's-
very much about, and exactly that Route 66. This was the way bringing the people to the gold rush of California
Yeah.
and pushing aside all the
Yeah.
people living there in the first place.
Well, I think the people who are very sentimental about these long roads are the people who belong to the tribe that built the roads.
Speaking of long roads, we should think about Siberia or all that continent of Eurasia and of the Silk Road, which was a topic yesterday.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about East really all the way through the Japanese and Chinese seas might be part of that space?
I thought about it, but it started as a child, and it started smaller than that. I was raised in the eastern part of Holland, near the German border. And my grandparents lived in the center of Holland. And that's where my father was raised, and that's where he met my mother. And in the 60s, I'm from 62, so in 66, 67, my father was able to buy a car. It was his first car, and he bought with that freedom. I was the youngest of 3. I had 2 elder brothers. There was a dog. Every time they wanted to go to visit their parents, my grandparents, it was a hassle to go to the train, timetables, buses, walking. But then there was this car, this small, auf Deutsch sagt man ein Ente, ein Citroën Ente.
Yes,
ein Regenschirm auf Wielen. Still, many cars followed. But when I talked to my mother, who's 91, do you remember this first car? She gets all emotional, yeah. So, and when my father took us he was a very silent man, but when he took us to the middle of the country, to the village where he was raised, and not born but raised, he got a bit talkative. He said a few words. If you want your children to remember what you say, you have to shut your mouth for most of the time, and when you say something, they remember. And what he said was, look at this road. It's a very special road. And I thought, yes, of course, it's the road to my grandparents. But he said, no, it's the E8. It goes from London to Moscow. And I thought, wow. Later, it was uitgebreid. It was made longer. It went from Cork to Omsk. He would never have said, this is a road from Cork to Omsk. But then it was London to Moscow. And I knew these towns, these cities from the news, and I thought, so a road that looks familiar can be something very special when you know a bit more. So, and this road for me, I was 7, 8, from London to Moscow. It was an enormous distance because we never went to Germany because there was a border and there was a history. So that there is that you can link stories to things that look normal, that kindled my imagination, and that's where it originated.
So we added a second term. We have the roads and the border. I think they are very closely linked.
Yeah, they're very closely linked, and I think that's the key to the answer for the question, why don't we have this same deep feeling with our roads that go on for thousands of miles? That's because of these borders. And in America, these roads were built by the tribe that loved them. But here the roads are always there. And you have to travel just 1 hour, 2 hours, and you get on the territory of your neighbor. And with this neighbor, you've got a history. And the history is not always pleasant. And the roads were often built by people who had great ideas to march, like you said, the Romans, the French, to march off the suns to some distant horizon, never to come home again, which is not a pleasant thing.
Funny that you mentioned these to Moscow. When I was a student, I grew up in Graz, so at the southeastern part of Austria, and borders were very close, Hungary, the Iron Curtain, and Yugoslavia. But for me, it was the train station, because there was that, I guess even daily train with a few wagons going to Amsterdam. So you had that word on the train. Yeah. Graz Amsterdam was a direct train, yeah? Or at least a carriage, which is the one thing. But Patricia, you do if I understand correctly, you do the opposite. Instead of traveling, you bring the world into one space, which is a stage in a theater or a space for a performance. What are you doing exactly?
I was thinking about what you were saying about the roads, and it's true. Like for example, I come from Portugal, so actually the sea as a travel route has a bigger presence than the highway, because we have the Alps, so we have to cross Spain, France, and then the rest of the world is there. But with the sea, you just go and you pick a direction. So
when you're sitting in Lisbon, you have that huge gateway,
yes,
and behind there is no road, it's just the sea.
It's
but
just,
it's a
exactly,
gateway, yeah? That's so funny, I think.
Yes, and it's just so, I only understood that actually when I moved to Utrecht, because it really plays a huge role, not only the history and what it's been told, what we have to rethink and reevaluate, but also the presence. I mean, the river Tagus in Lisbon is so wide that actually for a very long time I thought it was already the sea. So it was really strange to is there a difference between a river and a sea? It's because I don't see that difference. So it's very interesting because it does sparkle your imagination. And also then living in Belgium for a while, the roads, in fact, are passageways. So they're not like something that everyone passes through, because that's a very strong geographical change for me. So I lived for a very long time in a corner, in a way. But there's sea, and then there's the rest of Europe. Let's put it this way. And then in Belgium, everything is at hand, but everybody also passes by, so crosses and uses the country to go somewhere else. And that also affects the way you relate to the roads, but also to people, and also to how it sparkles your imagination. But the theater, I work in a theater now, and it's the first time, I think, I'm a kind of a strategical mistake. I'm a nomad being put in a theater, and actually being fixed to a place, which is something I never did. But exactly trying to keep this place, and most of all during this year and a half, the theater was closed for a big amount of time, but it never stopped. And one of the main reasons why it didn't stop was, first of all, because I think we have to take care about not only our physical health, let's put it this way, that I'm generalizing, but also our mental health. And meeting, we travel because we want to see things, and we know and we learn and we see things because we travel. And not the other way around. And if you stop doing that, you stop looking at the world in the same way. And if that's prolonged in time, especially for younger people, I find it very worrying. And so my attempt was to bring the world and bring geography, not only the world and things from different parts of the world, but geography into this one small space in Viseu, because Viseu, strangely enough, is the only capital district in Europe, I think, that does not have a train station. It was destroyed in the 80s. Access to other cities is not obvious, so we don't have kind of one of these. We have one big national road called the National 2, the N2. So it's not the E5, it's the N2, that crosses the whole country. And that's the one that kind of passes through Viseu. But for the rest, it's very difficult, and I came across that problem. Like, it's very easy to do Lisbon-Madrid, but it takes almost as much time to go do Viseu-Bragança. And then it makes you wonder what also our intentions in how we can actually travel in a place. So I thought it was very important to keep a connection, a direct connection with the rest of the world, and not turn. There was a whole, I don't know how it was here in Austria, but in Portugal we started a lot, and of course seriously, and it was a valid decision to support the local artists and everyone that was working nearby. But I think it's very important that we support, that we keep talking, that we keep meeting, we keep coming here despite the difficulties, because because that's why we are what we are today. It's because we traveled and because we meet people.
So you added a third term as a cornerstone. We have the road, we have the border, and we have the crossroads now. And now a theater, by definition, is a kind of crossroads, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's a very limited space. In the old times you had even what in German we call Guckkastenbühne. So it's like a frame which is limiting the space where it happens. Why did you choose that limited space, and what is it for you? What makes the theater or the performance space that you're working with?
I think it's not limited. I think it's because it's small. It's limited in physical space, but it does allow all kinds of options and proposals to happen there. And
is this like a laboratory?
No, it's a 19th century theater that was reconstructed. So
no, I mean for you in your conception.
Yes, in a way, yes, very much so. And
you can put everything in a small scale and then
look
at it and see, oh, what's going to happen.
It's a cabinet. It's a cabinet curiosité in a way. It should be, a theater should be that. And it should be a place where, because we can travel, we are the lucky ones, in fact. All the goods can travel. It's quite amazing. I was finishing some weeks ago a second film, a part of a film that was supposed to be a play, but we cannot do it because it's with half of the companies from Brazil. So we don't see each other for 2 years now, and but the project turned into our connection. We have met online every week since March 2020, and we did a film, and now we're doing a second one called Reconciliation, and now we do the second one that is premiering next week, funny enough. And one of the things that we talk about is that during the hardest time of the quarantine, both Antwerp's harbor and the harbor of Santos in Brazil just kept going. And in the harbor of Santos in Brazil, I think it's 70% of everything that comes in Brazil, which is quite a big place, 70% stops there and goes to the rest of Brazil and Latin America. That didn't stop. So goods could travel still and go on, but people couldn't. But the theater can invite people to travel to other places and to not forget, most of all, and I find it very important, that we should and we can meet strangers. Because what I find really difficult and a big task for us now, it's not the practical thing of being only in your bubble, being with just with your family and with the ones you live with, because we hope it's temporary, but it's the fact that you lose the capability of meeting strangers and having them on a regular basis in your life. And if you don't do that, you don't see difference, you don't meet unexpected situations so often, you don't get surprised, you don't fall in love, you don't do a lot of very important things that you do when you travel.
For me, it was, you just referred to that experience with your friends in Brazil, to see them every week or every other week online, with that very unexpected starting point last March 2020. For me, in my work, it was the opposite. We used that kind of communication for quite a few years, and the most astounding example was, I was asked a few years ago, I guess 3 years ago, by people in Colombia to work with them, and we did a fairly complicated project about statistics, but still a project over more than half a year, and we never met a single time during that period, and only at the end, and it was all on video conferencing. And then, by coincidence, I made it to Bogota and found myself in that small room that I knew from the outside. And that was a very funny moment, because we knew each other not only as video conferencing partners, we knew each other, full stop. And I want to lead back to you, Mathijs. The roads, as you describe them, are a physical structure. Did that notion change now over the past 2 years with all that digital? And I have a follow-up question then.
Yeah, but I hope that my answer connects to your follow-up question. Yes, it changed my perspective. What I didn't realize enough or at all when I started my research is that we are the strangers ourselves. Walter Grond came to me just before we started here, and he told me that his father, who was called Hans Grond, got a phone call one day, and he said, "Yeah, Hans Grond." And on the other side was someone from Rotterdam. He says, "I'm also Hans Grond. I'm looking at my family history." And this is what I realized, that every family history becomes a travel history. Every family story becomes a travel story when you go a few generations back. And it has been for thousands of years like this in Europe. What I learned in school was that the real traveling started with the steam engine and the Industrial Revolution. But one of my stories in my book is about a cauldron that is found in the north of Denmark. And it was made, by the characteristics of it, you could see that it was made in Bulgaria 2,000 years ago. And it ended up in a swamp in Denmark 2,000 years ago. How did that happen? So I went to Copenhagen to see the cauldron and to talk with the people from the museum, and I decided to make the same journey the cauldron once made. And then there was a conservator who worked there called Karin Vrij. She was German, and she said, "Before you go, I want to show you something." And she took me to the girl of Echtvet, het meisje van Echtvet, which is a girl from the Bronze Age. So she lived 1500 before the BC in Denmark, and she is found in a mound. She was buried there ceremonially, and everything. The girl itself was gone, except for her teeth and her hair, but everything was still there. Beautiful clothes, remnants of flowers, a beach container for beer, a beach container with the ashes of a very young child. And the Danish people were very, very proud. They said, "This is a Danish princess." And then there was this German conservator who said, "I'd like to do something new, an analysis of what's in her hair and what's in her teeth." And it's an analysis with the strontium isotope. In short, you can determine where the girl was when she had. Her hair was this long. It takes 2 years to grow that long. So like the rings of a tree, you can divide this hair into stages of her life, the last 2 years of her life. They saw that she was about 16, 17 when she died, and the last 2 years of her life she traveled thousands of kilometers. This is in the Bronze Age of Denmark. And she was not Danish at all. She was from the Black Forest, or Czech, near the Danube, near here. And she didn't dare to tell the museum what she found, because she found this in a time that of the refugee crisis, where the borders of Denmark were very closed to foreigners, and they were very into themselves. So she wanted to show me that, and she said, "Remember, people always traveled. We ourselves are the strangers in our own continent."
You lead me to a different question than the one I had intended, but I brought something that really fits here, and I guess the both of you have seen that woman.
Yes, the fertility.
You stole it from Rome.
She was found 23 kilometers from here,
Yeah.
where we sit, and she was buried there 30,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And roughly,
More or less.
yeah, more or less, yes. And that's here it is called the Venus of Willendorf by the location where she was found. And she was found certainly here because of that valley of the river Danube being a road for ages, for long ages, and a fair amount of the expansion of humans into Europe was occurring at that period between 25,000 and 40,000 before today, along that river, and you find that type of figurines in various locations. These are the really old roads, and they have not been built but found. And still, as you say, people could move at fairly big distances already then, because they were moving normally not within 2 years 1,000 kilometers, but within 2 or 3 millennia, but occupying territory and bringing geography. What are your thoughts about when we speak really about that concept of the very, very old roads? Whoever.
Well, I started my book 2 million years ago, where the first humans wander into, well, our nephews, the Homo erectus, wanders into Europe. Before that, it was empty as far as humans were concerned. And you talk about the rivers. I came here by train from Amsterdam. There's still a direct train from Amsterdam to Vienna. And first it follows the Rhine, and then it follows the Main, and then it via the Inn, it goes to the Danube. So these old roads are still very present today.
These are roads which are not about projecting power.
They are
not about projecting power. These are geography roads.
Yeah, because imagine the theory is now of the first humans who wandered into Europe, like 1.1 million years ago. They followed the coast, because all Europe was and sometimes they went up the rivers, but they followed the trails of animals. They followed the coast and they followed the rivers because there were no other roads, and these are the natural routes to take, because when you wander into the forest you get lost. It was still so in Roman times. But I'm not sure what to say next.
But also looking for food. I mean,
yeah,
they were not power routes, but they were survival routes in a way. Of course, you establish yourself always where there's water, where there's food, where there's shelter.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the cities, and as we have them still today, they're pretty much close to where water is.
Yeah.
And catching some fish in the river was easier than killing a mammoth.
Exactly, and quicker.
Yeah, they might have. When you wander into a continent where you're the first of your species, you have to find a niche. And the scholars in Utrecht told me that they thought that the Homo erectus who wandered into Europe was a kind of a coast ape, coast human, because there was the least amount of concurrency there. So they were on their own mostly. Later they went up to the wave that you are talking about is of sapiens who came later into Europe, and they might have used the river valleys as well. Sure they did. But for my travels, I very much have looked at the landscape. Yesterday there were the Erika and Kapka were talking about how they travel, and they really want to meet people and talk to people. I'm a bit shy. I like to talk to people, but I mostly look at the landscape. I take one personage, one character that from the past, and I look at the travel he or she has made, the journey, and I try to find similar things, features in the landscape that are still present today. And lots of things are still present today. You talked about the Pyrenees as a wall between the Iberian Peninsula and the rest of Europe. That was the same a million years ago. The rivers are still more or less on the same routes as they were then. So when you move through Europe, you look about, you see an archive that is much older than the written archive, from which you can try to conclude what it is to be a European and to live in Europe. Europe is a peninsula. You talked about the sea, to the north, to the west, to the south. There is a coast. So it's like it's called the cul-de-sac of the prehistory, the dead-end road of the prehistory. It was, and the people who wander about here, they meet each other. And when they meet each other, it's not always pleasant. There's lots of violence. And it has to do also with the landscape. And the landscape is still here today. So
I want to add a fourth category. We have the road, the border, the crossroads, and I want to add the sense of belonging, or what we call today identity. And for me, always the funny thing is that we define that belonging about where we are right now, so making it as close as possible, and not this is where I come from, this is where I'm going to. I have a little bit the feeling that much of your work is more about that, where do I come from, where do I go to?
Yes, it's about, well, culture is a transaction, is a travel in itself. There is no, it's like a map. No, we were talking about, of course, we are being very Eurocentric when we see the map with us in the center. You just need to live somewhere else and you see the world in a different way. And but for example, we always have this idea of keeping our culture, which I never understood what it is, when culture is exactly the trade between different things you meet on the way while traveling, and you create the music that is a connection between sounds and harmonies and rhythms that you hear or that you received from somebody who traveled and sang to you or played for you, and what you already know. So there is no other way to look at any kind of cultural background or any kind of there is no perception of the world without travel, and there are no fixed points. I think I'm very much interested in geography, most of all, as I said in the beginning, since the pandemic, and how you bring geography and physical experience not only in meeting us, each other, but also this idea that it is different if I am a few meters next to the Danube, or if I live all my life in front of a river that looks like a sea, or if I live surrounded by mountains. So, and if I travel and I see the connection between these places, because that's another thing. If I take a plane, I don't understand the connection, and that's why I don't understand why this road is important or that road is important. I also don't develop a sense of belonging, because it's all a bit of a... sometimes I used to say about London that it was a mushroom city. It's like you pop up, you go into the metro, and then you go into, how the hell did this change into this? You know, and then you go down again, and you come out in a completely different place. And it's important to know the connection between places. For example, one of the things I want to do with my daughter, I don't think she wants to do it, but I would like to do it. So maybe I will wait a little bit longer. It's to walk from Antwerp to Lisbon. So we belong to these two places. I can't get rid of Belgium, even if I would like to. I don't would like to, but I am part of these travels, these stories. My daughter is half Belgian, half Portuguese, and you are. If we really start, I mean, we don't have to do much. For example, a very nice exercise is just to go to your kitchen table. It's also culture. What we cook, nothing comes from the place where you are. You know, you get the coriander comes from India. You get the, you know, I don't know, the meat it was bought. It comes from the north of something. You get the butter. It comes from France. And even if you buy local, all these things were planted somehow because you traveled and you brought things. So there is no belonging in that sense for me, in this sense of a fixed point that it belongs to you and you belong to it. Even if you were born there, even if you've lived there all your life, you profited, I'm not sure if this is the right word, but you engaged with the rest of the world just by the fact that you were born here in this kind of strange planet. So I would not, I think actually one of our biggest problems is that we are so keen still in another 19th century idea, in this idea of nation and in this idea of border, and we don't take the crossroads as an important point where we meet and trade not only goods, well, physical material goods, but also immaterial goods. And that would be a very good starting point. That was actually the plan and the dream of Common Europe, to actually break those borders and create also a more idea of a collective story and histories.
Can I say something about your daughter?
Go ahead.
I've got a daughter, and I had exactly the same sentiment. She's 30 now, and a couple of years ago she married, but she's the daughter of I separated from her mother. She grew up in London, later in Aberdeen. We kept in very good contact, but and she married a guy from America. So her generation and her peers, they are shattered all over the world, and she travels by plane. And I said, I just would like to take you through Europe once, not in a plane, but walking. Well, we took a car. Sorry, and she married this bloke, Joe, but they had to find a place somewhere in Europe. It didn't matter where. It had to be a nice place because the people came from all over the world anyway. So decided to marry on an island, a Croatian island, Vis. And I said, let me bring you to Vis. Go into my car, and her dress was in the back, and the ironing board. And we drove, and I said, I'd love to show you Europe as it is, and explain how it is, why it is as it is. And we followed the Rhine, the old road. We went over the wall of the Alps. We came down into Italy, and we stopped 3 times on the way to sleep and eat, and we saw everything change gradually and sometimes abruptly because of the wall of the Alps. And I was so happy to show her Europe. So you have, do it. I can recommend it very heartily.
I have a totally different question now. You shared with us a lot about how you are perceiving things, how you think about things, but I have no idea whatsoever what it looks like when you do a performance. What are you doing exactly?
I think the best way is to give examples. What was the last? Well, the last one, I give different examples. One of the biggest performances I did was a banquet. And it was about thinking, what is the symposium of the 21st century? How do we relate? And it was for 100 people.
Taken from
the banquet, yes. And so it's a table in a DNA shape where people don't know what they're eating, so they're separated as it was in a ritual of having a last meal. So people are not sitting next to the person they came with for the performance, but they can see the person because the table does this DNA shape like this. And we eat for 2 hours and a half, which is the period of digestion. So when you end, it's like, it's fine, but it's not that you feel full. And we build a tree, the second tree. It's the story of the second tree. What happened, what would have happened if we had ate from the second tree and not the first tree? So what's the difference between eating from the tree of life or the tree of knowledge? And the food is the building of a tree. So you start with seeds and earth and leaves and branches and resin, you know, this
grapes,
blood from it, and fruits, and it goes on until the end. So you build a meal like that. That's one performance. It's a very beautiful performance.
Does this have an audience, or is everyone?
Everyone who's sitting, eating is the audience,
So
and you're listening.
The audience are.
And the people who serve you are the performers, and there are no words. They don't talk to you. They just serve you and create a very personal relationship with you. And you hear a story, several stories that happen. That's one story. But I also kidnapped an audience. Actually, I presented here in Salzburg a long time ago. That was in 2005, 2006. So it was based on this image. It was the topic of the moment, terrorism, and this idea that terrorism is fiction in real time, like theater is fiction in real time. So we decide for a moment the world is not like this. It's, you know, you have a camera because just the same way roads made it able, or planes made it able for us to go faster somewhere, a video camera that it's not a professional camera also made it possible to create an image in the middle of the mountains where nobody sees you, and suddenly you create an image of 2 minutes of a horrible deed, and the whole world sees it, and the world stops its natural course or this ongoing course and looks at another reality. So it was about that. It's about like, how do you do fiction in real time, and how at the time, now I usually say it's my pre-selfie performance, because it was about a flat man, so it was based on Flatland by Edwin Abbott. It's a 19th century priest who wrote about mathematics. So it's about, I think, a dot that meets a triangle, but one day meets a sphere and goes crazy. So I did that with also when you are in a certain reality and suddenly you realize, so he's a flat man, so he's a theater, a flat human being in a way, who suddenly is a dot in a book, and he realizes that actually when pages turn, there's actually something out there who has more dimensions than he or she, a dot. And so this dot wants to be like these people who read, like the readers. So the story is like that. So he kidnaps people to force them to look at him all the time. Because if he's read or watched, in the case of performance, all the time, he exists all the time. And I think we live pretty much in a time like this. But I also, so it's things like that. They very seldom happen in a theater, on a stage. They happen in churches, in palaces, on the street, in black boxes, whatever it's possible. And the idea is always to think about the world, try to think as if I was not human. What if I'm a dot? Or what if I'm a tree? What if I'm a whale killing the trainer, like the Telecom? And So trying to, I think it's a good exercise, and I think theater is the excellent, par excellence, the place where you can see yourself like something else. And again, it's this obsession with meeting something we don't know.
But at least in one regard, if I understand correctly, you maintain the old concept, and that is you are the magician who makes that happen, like with the puppets and everything.
Of course, it's this idea.
You're the one in control who is instigating that entire thing.
No, of course, the stories have that power. It's you know, somebody comes on stage and says, "I'm the king of Denmark," and we all go like, "Okay, sure," but also a government comes in and says, you know, this is all a lie. We're all, I don't know. We now should be subjugated to this or to that other country. That's also a story. And we all tell stories, and we all once in a while have to revise and rethink our stories, because they're all the same. There's 3 or 4 main stories, and we kind of reorganize them, rethink them, and relive them in certain ways, but we have to question them. So more, I think it's a place, theater is also a place to think with the head upside down also, because I give you another example. One of my most beautiful performances, which is not a performance, a kind of an installation, is called Ortus. It literally changed me, because all books do that, or performances or works that we do. But I wanted to build a labyrinth at the Erasmus house near Brussels, not Brussels, but it's nearby. And I wanted to talk about, this is 2012, funny enough, it was 2020, so I did it again in 2020. It was Imagine 2020. It was a project that went around in several theaters about thinking about the world in 2020, which is funny, interesting. And I wanted to do something about slowing down. What if we would stop to the point that we could actually change things by doing nothing? And as I studied more and more about this labyrinth that I wanted to do in a garden, the garden, I left everything, so there's nothing. I did it together with Christophe de Boek, a sound artist. And so we just put sound, we invited an algorithm mathematician who made an algorithm for plants, for all the plants that we had in a garden. Each garden, we traveled around Europe with this installation, and we calculated the amount of sun each plant received, the amount of heat, human heat, so with proximity of human beings, and the amount of wind. And so we did a stock auction for plants, because that's how we see plants. We see them as resources. So it's like, okay, this one is getting more sun and more wind, this is winning. So the sound would be louder of birds on this tree. So it all had to do with how many people were in this garden, when, how, and also if the tree was higher, of course it would get more sun than the one that is lower. And we created this kind of stock exchange that would change also with the light during the day. So the exhibition would change as the light was going down. But there was one detail that was hardly ever noticed and that I find very, very beautiful, which is by Christophe de Boek, and it was very, very moving, which is, if it happens that everybody stops moving in this garden, which is not often, because people walk in a garden and talk and meet, and because it's an installation, they go there to see. You know, we are very much used to it. We go and we see, and there was nothing to see, it was just to hear. And I had some plates, like botanic plates, with words being described in the different perspectives, like decomposition of a body is different than decomposition of the land to regenerate. Regeneration is also different, has different meanings, but also growth for economic purposes is different than growth of a plant or growth of ideas. So at one point, if everybody stopped, the birds, this soundscape that we made of birds, would start moving around the whole garden as a flock, so as a group of birds, which they're not there, so immediately you notice something. And that was it was very rare that it happened. And I had the chance last year, we did it in 2020, we did it at the Gulbenkian Foundation in a beautiful garden. And once in a while I used to go, that's my job and the installation is on, once in a while I'll just go around checking that everything is working. Because of course there's always a cable not working. It's a very old installation, so it's not wireless. So there's always something that is gone and something that is taken and so on. The batteries are out. And that happened. But as it happened, I was walking and making, because I know where the sound is, and I was making I stopped because I realized that when I was checking that it was moving, and you need this moment that everybody stopped to start this, but then you can go on. And I'm the kind of spectator who knows about this, so I traveled with the birds. And I saw all the reactions of people going like, there are no, where are these birds coming from? And I find this, I think it's one of the most beautiful performances I did, and it's all there. It's just this connection with what you don't see, but if you understand, because the gardener of the Gulbenkian Foundation, when we were building, said to me, this bird is not real, because they don't fly at this height, so you're cheating on me. So you need to know, depending on how much you know, you understand the stories in different ways. That's what I mean. Whether it's birds or food or...
There was a French movie in the 1970s, L'an 01, on arrête tout. The year one, we stop everything. And it was literally about people stopping everything. I guess you...
I think this perhaps what we should do.
You brought us a text that you can read. Sure.
I was actually thinking, this is not the appropriate one, but I'll still do it. But I'll check. Sorry, I just didn't print it, but I will check if I have the other one. I'll explain. I can't read, I forget. I wear glasses since a couple of months. And it's hilarious because I already lost them like 2 times. And wait a second. So I just see if I have the other one here. That because of, no, I don't. But I'll do this one. It's one of my, not from the last book, but the one previously. So from 2016. It's called Working Days, and it's 7 short stories from Monday to Sunday. And of course I chose Saturday for today, but I was thinking of Thursday, actually, because of something you said. And it's about, actually I met this gentleman, I mean, the story is a fiction based on an artist I met in Wales that was cutting pieces of earth, like of this size, and taking them to the next place where he was going. And I thought it was such a beautiful, that's all he did. He was a landscape artist. And so when I met him, he was in Wales, and he had come from, I think, Germany, somewhere in Germany, so he was cutting this piece out of Wales and putting a piece of... So the story of Thursday is someone who changes the world so much. He starts, but he puts a piece of earth in his pocket, he goes somewhere else, then he takes another piece of earth, and he goes on to the point that actually when he comes back to the original place, the place is not what it is anymore. But I will read Saturday, which is another kind of travel. I'll read just a little bit. It's about traveling to another, maybe to another dimension, depending on, or to another format, depends on our beliefs and how we tell our stories from birth to death. All animals sleep. This is the rule to which there can be no exception. Horses sleep standing up. Seals, Humboldt penguins, and ducks all sleep with one eye open. Bottlenose dolphins and beluga whales rest half of their brain at a time. Sea otters sleep intertwined with one another, floating along camouflaged by seaweed. Giraffes take a series of 10-minute naps amounting to a total of half an hour a day. Bats and porcupines can sleep for 20 hours straight, and I haven't been able to sleep since you died. Lab rats die after 2 to 3 weeks of sleep deprivation, A ship quickly wastes away if not permitted to dream, and yet somehow I'm managing to put up with the weight loss, the changes in the tone of my voice, the growing paranoia, the hallucinations, and the constant humming in my head. I've tried everything: heavy meals, ambient music, narcotics, herbal teas, cold showers, and every kind of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. It's not really possible to experience being asleep, but I do know what not being awake feels like. I'm incapable of making decisions. I don't recognize my friends' faces. I don't return missed calls. I'm a sleepless soldier, lost in the battle against your absence. In the daytime, I get by on coffee, stimulants, and loud music. At night, on tranquilizers and painkillers and endless channel hopping. You were always impressed by the sheer quantity of random facts I carry around in my brain, but this time you interrupted my monologue and made a suggestion. Let's pretend we're fakirs, you asked. How do you do that? I asked you back. It's easy. I saw it in a Brazilian documentary. We climb to the top of a tree, lie down on a branch of our choice, and stay there doing nothing for as long as possible. The last one to move wins. We climbed the tallest tree. We stayed there. We were always so good at doing nothing. And it goes on.
Patricia Portela, thank you very much, but you stay with us. I want to pursue with the roads. I guess it's, again, not a coincidence that both of you, at one point or another, refer to the 19th century as a kind of a starting point for what we understand as travels and roads today. That was the implementation of the biggest machinery to that date, the railway network, which is indeed a network of roads.
Yeah.
What's your sense about that 19th century, and to what extent does this frame our concept of moving around today?
Well, I think that the Industrial Revolution gave us not only, I haven't written about the railroads, I've written about the roads, but what they have in common is the technology. And the technology that came out of the 19th century made people very enthusiastic. Even it provided a kind of a story that we all had in common. And in order to travel safely through Europe, a story that we all share is essential. Like the pilgrims that traveled through Europe in during what we call the Middle Ages. They were there under protection of a story, the big story of the Catholic Church. They all knew what they were going to. They all knew wherever you came from, this is what you had in common. And this gave you the possibility to travel freely through Europe. In the beginning of the 20th century and late 19th century, it was the technology that we were all very, very enthusiastic about. The historian Philip Blom, who lives in Vienna, has written this marvelous book about the first 14 years of the 20th century. And he talks about the racers who in 1991, 92, and 1903 raced over the roads of Europe from Paris to from Paris to Berlin was the first one. From Paris to Vienna was the second one. And from Paris to Madrid was planned to be the third one. But the third one in 1904 was halfway, it was cancelled because too many people died. Imagine the first one, 1901. People from, the racers from Paris raced into Germany. Germany and France had been, well, that was the 1870-1871 war, and where France was humiliated by Germany, and the borders were quite closed. But once these cars came, there was a new story for which both the French and the Germans were very enthusiastic, and all the borders went open, and there was no problem of them racing over the roads. So this is what for a short while till it ended in the horrors of the First World War, where the flip side of the technology was revealed in all its horror. But from the second half to the 19th century to the first years of the 20th century, this belief in progress and this belief in technology was a kind of a new religion story that enabled people to travel freely over the roads of former enemies.
When we go really back to that introduction of the railroads and the power of moving people from one place to another place, which led to that enthusiasm about the technology, we often forget that that triggered an enormous amount of migration, something that we would call migration today. People from Eastern Europe moving to America, but also to Vienna, Budapest, Berlin, building these cities that are ours today. And that was triggering the same pattern of extremist politics that we are confronting today. And as you said, the driving force of this was technology. So it's this ambivalence between, how should I say, a material trigger which suddenly brings about all kinds of immaterial consequences.
You need time to understand what you've made. You know, the fact that people traveled from one country to the other is thousands of years old, but the scale on which it happened differed, of course. I'm not sure if the scale of the migration triggered these wars, or the extremism, because the extremism was rooted. These were old stories that were rooted also in, like, the anti-Semitism. It was also. I don't think it has that aspect has anything to do with the technology. I'm not sure, but.
So you think that technology is more neutral?
Well, up to a point, till you see that like in the First World War, that the technology has become so big that the human scale is out of sight.
So steel is not the problem. You can turn it into a plow or into a gun.
Yeah.
That's your concept.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but
okay.
Perhaps tomorrow I've thought more about this. And
good. But today, now,
yeah.
You brought us to an excerpt of your book.
Yeah.
And you will read that in German. I very much appreciate. And so we have your voice, the sound of your voice, traveling across your lines of text. And you explain quickly what it is.
Well, it's the starting point of one of the first chapters that is called Der Wegbereiter, and it's about the eerste Europeer, and the voyage, the travel is from Dmanisi, Atapuerca to Hapsburg. In Hapsburg, Haysborough is on the coast of Norfolk of England, and because of rising sea levels, there's a lot of erosion there. And at one point, after a storm, the cliffs collapsed, and old sediments came to the light. And in these sediments, who were 800,000 years old, there were footprints. And up till that moment, nobody had thought that 800,000 years ago, when it was cold there, like in Scandinavia now, there were any humans, but there they were.
We always leave footprints, right?
Yeah, we do. Alles, was man sich vorstellen kann, ist schon einmal geschehen. Lange bevor zum ersten Mal umherziehende Menschen Europa betraten, waren an seine Küste Ertrunkene angespült worden. Jäger, die an der Nordküste Afrikas lebten, als es in Europa noch kein menschliches Wesen gab. Ganz bestimmt war hin und wieder ein Homo erectus von einem Felsen ins Meer gefallen oder nach einem kargen Winter ins Wasser der Straße von Gibraltar gewatet, den Blick auf die Küste gegenüber gerichtet, einen Baumstamm vor sich herschiebend. Die Strömung nahm den ausgerutschten Fischer oder rittlings auf einem Stamm sitzenden Jäger mit, sanft, aber unerbittlich. Fort vom Land, durch die Meerenge. Die Kälte des Wassers umfing ihn, zog das Leben aus Armen und Beinen, dann aus der Lunge, dem Gehirn, dem Herzen. Und sie werden sich gefragt haben, wie es dort sein mochte, unter diesem Himmel, an dem die Sonne niemals erschien. Ob dort wohl jemand wohnte, Götter, Menschen, Ahnen.
Mathijs Deen, über alte Wege. Thank you very much, to both of you. We will have a little break, and then Patricia will stay with us, and we will welcome also Andrea Marcolongo, going back to the old Greeks. It's always the old Greeks, there were no young Greeks. Stay with us. Thank you.